Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the 435 podcast. I'm your host, Robert McFarland. Over the next several episodes, guys, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the 2025 municipal elections. Mayors and city council members from all over Southern Utah are going to be seeking your vote in helping shape the future of our cities. So this is the place that you're going to be able to get one-on-one conversations with all the candidates to help you make the best decision for you come election season. So please make sure you like and subscribe, share it with other voters throughout Washington County, and make sure they have the information they need to make the decisions that are going to be best for us in the county. We hope you enjoy this episode and this series of episodes, guys. We'll see you out there.
From the Blue Form Media Studios, this is the 435 podcast, the pulse of Southern Utah.
Nate Caplin, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Robert.
You're running for St. George City Council, right?
St. George City Council.
Sometimes I get them mixed up. I'm like, who's this one again?
You're interviewing a lot of people.
Yeah, we've been hammering through them. So thanks for coming on, taking some time. You're a busy guy.
Oh yeah. Well, it's my pleasure to be here, and I appreciate your time.
Sweet. So for people that don't know you, have you run for political office before?
I did. About 11 years ago, I ran for county attorney.
That's right. Okay, I remember seeing that.
Yeah, and I came in second place out of two people.
Out of two, you got second. You're the first loser, unfortunately.
And Brock Belknap won, and he's a great attorney, great man too.
Yeah. So you ran for that. So what do you do for work? Maybe give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, sure. Well, I majored in economics at Southern Utah University. I was the outstanding econ student for 2006.
Nice.
That dates me. I went to law school at BYU, did a master's in history also there. I taught writing and rhetoric, both honors and regular level at BYU. I did an internship at a civil rights firm down in Mississippi. I was the first principal at Mikuni International College, which is a LDS Christian school in Japan, the only one.
Oh, wow.
I was their first principal. I taught at Snow College for several years. I was department chair, associate professor of social science. I worked at Barney McKinnon Olmsted, which is a regional law firm here.
Yep.
I was a law clerk / staff attorney for Judge Hanson in the 4th District Court. Worked for the Utah County Sheriff's Office. I went to Post, which is, I only went to the part where you become a bailiff. It's the lowest level. So I'm not special, but I did go to Post.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was enjoyable. I learned a lot of law, actually. I was already a lawyer when I went, and I learned a lot of practical law because law school teaches you how to think like an attorney, and law enforcement is the purest and most on-the-ground application of law.
Yeah.
It probably is.
It's the executive arm of law, right?
Yeah, it is the tip of the spear of the executive arm. That's right.
Yeah.
I worked for Utah Tech for a number of years. Well, I'm still there now. And why I'm at Utah Tech is because Kevin Simmons, Lowry Snow, myself, and the head of the Juvenile Justice and Youth Services Division of Utah, we came together to create this program called the Higher Education for Incarcerated Youth Program.
Okay.
And currently it is America's #1 leading provider of higher education and college education for kids in juvenile justice. So a lot of the students here in Utah take concurrent enrollment classes where they get double high school and college credit simultaneously. Mm-hmm. For example, in a
when I took my microeconomics, I was in high school. I was a senior in high school because I went to a school that had concurrent for both. But yeah,
that's right. And this was our very first class for the incarcerated youth, is the economics of social science and economics. And it's kind of like a mini version of micro and macro together, but a lot more applicable, we feel like. So we started with that, and the program's grown. So I'm the director, and we have professors from BYU, Weber State, Southern Utah University. They teach everything that's general education, math, English, philosophy. And we even have a few students who are pursuing a bachelor's degree. And so they will leave juvenile justice with either an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. And we think that will have a big impact on intergenerational poverty because higher education of adults while incarcerated seems to, according to the RAND Corporation and a lot of other stuff I've written in my dissertation at the University of Southern California, which is an education doctorate, I'm almost done with that.
No, you're good. This is fascinating.
That we find that among adults, every dollar you invest into higher education in the carceral system, there's a $5 return in saved money in lower recidivism, up to 43%. It ranges from 28% to 43%, depending on the study, but this is among adults. And then also employment opportunities are double-digit percentages higher among prisoners who take post-secondary education while incarcerated. We think that the employment opportunities among incarcerated youth, which are held up to age 25 in Utah, will increase at a higher rate than that 13%. We also think that when it comes to the investment, because of the long-term impact on intergenerational poverty, it will be higher than a 5-to-1 return. I don't know, though, with recidivism, because interestingly, in some of my research, I found, and we could look at some maps of juvenile justice incidences. And speaking of juvenile justice incidences, that's the proper role of local government to deal with.
Yeah.
And you'll see, like in Massachusetts, there's a study in the early 1910s. So just after what we were talking about with the change in our financial system and political economy here in America, in the early 1910s, there was a study of juvenile and young adult men who were in reformatories, which were basically the equivalent of reform schools and juvenile justice prisons, like a combination of those things. And they looked at recidivism, which means repeated crime post-release. And you know what's crazy? It was the same in around 1910, 1915 as it is in 2019. There is zero change in recidivism rates over a 100-year period of intervention by government with respect to the juvenile justice
No matter what
system.
they've done. We've done all kinds of different stuff.
Yeah, but we think, and I'm not saying we're special, but we do think that higher ed is a new variable and a new input to that equation of behavior. But really, we find out that once people turn 25, they just are so much less likely to commit crimes. And that's about the time that neurobiologically you're developed.
Yeah. Your plasticity starts to change. You don't.
right.
You can fire new neurons throughout your brain easier the younger you are, which is why like little kids can speak other languages so simply because their plastic little brains can just fire off in these different places. But as they get older, you're firmed up. It's harder to do it.
It is so true. I was trying to write my Spanish ad for Juan, which is one of the Spanish radio stations. And I'm like, I cannot figure out affordable housing or attainable housing. None of it sounds right. And then finally, I'm like, I just go to AI and económico. I'm like, that sounds good. So,
yeah, just go with that.
And I talked to someone from El Salvador who helped me too.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. Oh, and along those lines, this is totally off topic. So we hope you stick with us, guys. You're going to learn more about Nate. I think you learned a ton from Nate already as it is. But they just released, I think it was Harvard did a study on continued use of ChatGPT and how it's like your wiring in your brain is like receding. You're lowering these synapses because you're relying so much on, these computers and these easy answers. And it was 2021. I was listening to I can't remember who said it. It was somebody I respect, but the statement was so poignant. And I was like, man, this is so true, is that we're getting into an age where it's less and less what you know and more who you know. And because you have that access to that information, it's not, what can I retain? It's, do I have the ability to access that information, and who do I know to be able to put those two things together? And it's a total evolution in the way people think and the way people are going to be productive in the future. And even this short-term study, which I'm sure there's a bunch of problems with the study because it's, just recently released, but the idea that if you just keep going to ChatGPT or something, you're going to actually those things that you're going to lose it. It goes the opposite way as you get older.
I think that's a keen insight. And me not being an expert in neuroscience at all.
Yeah, me neither. I'm not an expert.
But being interested in knowing the study you're talking about, actually, and some recent commentary that came out in the New Yorker, just actually this week, I think there's some serious evidence for what you're saying. And when it comes to teamwork, because there's a happy and productive side of who that concept. And then there's a very unfortunate side of who and that's favoritism in local government, which we don't want.
Right.
Because if we favor people because they're the ones who should get the benefit, should reap the increase in wealth of the underlying land valuations increasing across the county. If we're like, hey, Mrs. Smith, downtown St. George, if you're going to rent out your room for a week during one of our festivals here, that's illegal. But we're going to make sure that other people who have tens of millions of dollars to invest, they can rent it out nightly, and we're going to favor that. Now, I'll probably not get elected because I just pointed out a huge difference in favoritism, but my point here, I have about 5 points and reasons I'm running, but one of them is we must start treating the people who live here and work here equally to the investors and the tourists.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that is an issue with the police. It's not. St. George City Police is about the most ideal police department I've ever encountered and seen. What I'm talking about are incentives. Have we ever given Dixie Nutrition a tax incentive to come here or to stay here?
I don't know.
Have we for other companies?
It's probably.
Yeah, we have. And I'm not saying that we have a huge problem, but it's something we need to discuss out loud.
Yeah.
That's my point.
And we talked to Chad Thomas a little bit about political or economic incentives and what is the role of the city play and that kind of thing. And we could get to that too, because I'd like your thoughts on this, because there's some economic questions in this. But so how did you get to St. George? So you've worked in all these different places. Did jobs bring you here, and how long have you been here?
That is such a good question. Do you mind if I finish up the one thought on the positive parts of
please.
Who you know?
Yeah,
matters?
please. Yeah.
So Jonathan Haidt, who's a professor of social psychology at New York University, went down to the University of Virginia. A lot of people have read some of his work.
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah, and his point was, children without a lot of parental and authority overseeing their play develop the tools of democracy. And the tools of democracy are necessary for when we're adults, so that we're not constantly requiring the authority of government to deal with our neighbor. We can cooperate and we can discuss. Mm-hmm. And I think there are some problems with relying on AI a little bit too much in schoolwork. I've seen the amount of words written in essays massively increase and the substance almost become vapid. And it's interesting. Like, why write so much when there's nothing there? Mm-hmm. It's like, just tell me something concise.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, but how did I get here? Well, I was born in the hospital.
You weren't born in your parents' bathtub?
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that have been.
Out by the sagebrush. And
yeah.
No. I was born in the hospital just, southeast of the Temple in downtown St. George in 1981. A guy named Dr. Craig Booth. He has
a podcast, by the way, Doc Booth's podcast.
Oh, yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah.
And, I moved away when I was a baby, and I grew up in Indiana.
Or no, he doesn't have it, because I think he's passed away now.
But it's like in his name.
Yeah, in his name.
Honor.
Yeah,
that's right.
In his honor.
And I think Lyman Hafen might be.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So my family moved away to Texas when I was young. I grew up in Dallas back when most people still had a Southern accent in the 80s. It was really interesting. And then we moved to Northern Indiana. Schools there were so good. Like, the competition and the expectation of performance was, I probably didn't encounter that again until maybe my junior year when I moved back to St. George. I lived in Austin, Texas from elementary school to high school, played football there. Football in Texas is like basketball in Indiana on the Hoosiers movie, back in the 50s.
Yeah.
It was great. I mean, in ninth grade, they did our laundry. They gave us free cleats. They bought us barbecue. I'm like, we're 15, 14, or whatever.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Anyway, so my mom, she's a local resident. She was born here. And her dad was a math teacher. His name was Paul Brooks. And her mom was Linda Brooks. And she came from a big family. The youngest daughter was actually younger than me. My aunt is younger than me, the eighth kid. And my grandmother was having a lot of health troubles. My dad had a software business in Austin, Texas. Most of his work was in LA anyway, with Honda of America, et cetera. So we decided, hey, why don't we locate to St. George? When I was 15, I really thought, I'm like, what do people do in St. George? I'm like, I swear I'm going to have to go work full time so we can pay for our mortgage when we got here. I literally thought that would be the case. I never asked my parents. I just figured that would be what I'd have to do.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I only had to work full time in the summer, and that was required by my parents. But they didn't take any of my money. So I came here in high school. I went to Snow Canyon High School in the late 90s, played on the football team. Dixie High School beat us in 1998.
Dang it.
And we won in 1999. So
that's good.
It was awesome to have, the greater Dixie area succeeding at the state level. Anyway, I served a mission in Southern California. My first area was Compton. That's like South Central LA.
Yep.
Yeah. Yo fui directamente entre a Compton rather than straight out of. Anyway, so, went to Dixie State University, graduated summa cum laude, SUU summa cum laude, JD at BYU, MA at BYU, finishing up an EDD at University of Southern California. But what brought me here is I love St. George, but there are actually so many economic opportunities here with the expansion of technology.
Yeah.
So how could Steaton Technology, which was started in Austin, Texas, how could that be based in St. George, in Tonnequin, actually?
Yeah.
And the answer is the internet.
Yeah.
And information infrastructure. And St. George is going to keep growing. We don't have to necessarily build everything here. We need to build the people here and bring as many smart people as we possibly can to do exactly what you're talking about. We all have the information. We need to collaborate, teamwork, entrepreneurship, and let the government get out of the way of what we're trying to do. We have some awesome investments already with public-private partnerships. For example, Innovation Plaza, which is with Utah Tech University, and St. George supports that. Really amazing things are happening there.
Yeah, I think that's you take me on. There's so many different like angles that I can go, and
please choose anyone.
The idea, public-private partnerships. Taking me to the next question is like, what is the role? And from your perspective, what is the role of the local government? Like if you were to just summarize, hey, these are the duties, like this is how I view what city government should be providing for the community.
That is such a good question. And I have to admit, I did some homework and I watched everybody's answer to that.
Nice.
And the answers, the people who are
you got a leg up. You got a leg up.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me do that. But honestly, for the audience watching, you should listen to the other candidates' answers, because in my opinion, the answers were erudite, they were enunciated well, and they were correct. And I agree with them. There's a huge breadth of things that the city does. But let me speak to it legally, as an attorney. And I teach economic history. So I think this interplay between what is literally the law and what that means on the ground is a really interesting one. So states, there were 13 of them, came together to create the U.S. Constitution, and thus our federal government, what became the United States of America. And prior to the Civil War, people all over the world would refer to the United States of America as plural. So they say the United States of America are growing at a very fast rate. And that was true. In 1800, the average woman, between 1750 and 1800, the average woman had between 7 and 8 children per female, which is incredible. That was, some people estimate that's the biological maximum. And Benjamin Franklin thought that was an amazing thing. A guy named Thomas Malthus, who was an early economic professor and an Anglican clergyman, who is sort of, his ideology is the basis of Charles Dickens' Scrooge. He's basically like, that's the worst thing in the world. America's horrible that they're having all these kids. Well, at that time, we are basically 13 little countries come together to make a nation, right? Well, in the U.S. Constitution, there's several articles, and they set forth the 3 branches of government. You have, of course, the legislative, executive, and judicial, plus a few more articles. But then when we add in the Bill of Rights, the combination of what's described in Article 1, which are specific enumerated powers for the federal government, and then going down to the 10th Amendment, which is ratified just a couple years after the Constitution by the states. It says, basically, I'm paraphrasing, any power not given specifically to the federal government, nor prohibited to the states, is reserved for the states and the people. Okay, so where do cities get their power? They get it from the state. So the federal government's power is narrow, traditionally. As you know, you mentioned the turn of the 20th century. Most of our income, well, first of all, income taxes were very, very low, except for during the Civil War, and then they're reintroduced by an amendment under Woodrow Wilson, who you mentioned. But early on in the 20th century, the vast majority of the federal government's revenue came from tariffs. I'm taking no position on tariffs. I'm just saying it did.
That's a very good point.
The vast majority of it did. And only by the time Woodrow Wilson is out of office and he's replaced by Harding dies in office, you got Coolidge, and right after Coolidge you have Hoover, and that's the beginning of what is the end of the Roaring '20s and the start of the Great Depression. In 1928-29, only about 5% of the gross domestic product in the United States was allocated to the federal government. During World War II, it was nearly 50%, something like 44 to 46%, depending on the year. Of course, for good reason, right? We're fighting Nazis and Imperial Japan, and I'm always in favor of fighting Nazis. Okay, but the point being, where does the state have a role in that? Well, the state has a role by sending 2 senators and, based on their population, people to Congress, and also allocating electoral votes. But the state itself, unlike the federal government, which is traditionally a narrow set of enumerated powers, according to James Madison in several of the Federalist Papers, the states have broad powers, and they're not defined. And they include things, they are defined by common law in England, but they're traditionally things like this: public health, public safety, education, public welfare. And the question is, can cities regulate and act in the same way states do? They cannot, because the cities didn't create the states. The states created the federal government, but the cities are actually created by the states.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Utah, our cities have broad power, more so than some other states. And we can even regulate public health to an extent, and
education a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's local government because it's not state.
Right.
Yeah, because we have the Washington County Board of Education, right?
That is correct. So a municipal government, Washington County Board of Education, or the Washington County School District more precisely, they are their own form of government,
right,
with the ability to raise taxes if necessary,
right,
and distribute the revenues therefrom to achieve education. And that's a good thing, because here in Utah, we have something, it's colloquially called home rule, but it gives a lot of power to municipalities. And so St. George does have significant power to be different than, say, Santa Clara and Hurricane. And there are differences. You can see them. It's not just because different people settled them, a smattering of immigrants from Western Europe and St. George and Swiss people in Santa Clara, but also the preferences of the people there. So ultimately, what should the local government do? As long as it doesn't violate the U.S. Constitution, the state constitution, or statute set forth by the state, which gives the municipalities power, I mean, they're basically a political subdivision of a sovereign state, then if you're within this realm, which Sean Guzman used to teach me, if it's not illegal, if it's not unethical, and it's not immoral, we in the city attorney's office, we just do what the city council wants us to do, if it's not illegal, unethical, or immoral. I used to work for him as a law clerk back in 2008, and I helped annex some of the beginning of the annexation of parts of Little Valley and nearby where the airport eventually came to be.
I talked to Sean. It was a fun conversation.
Yeah,
he's a smart guy.
Genius, and so friendly.
Yeah.
It's a really cool combination to be friendly and a genius. I wish I could be either one, but in any case, you're probably both. But in any case, when the city, as long as they're following the Constitution, both of the state of Utah and the U.S. Constitution, then where should they go? Okay, now they're within the realm of what's appropriate. They need to go to the people. And you were going to ask me, I think, you mentioned something about leadership. If it's okay, I'd segue into that.
The question is, how do you define leadership in the context of public service?
Yeah,
right.
So the perfect, to me, a seamless segue, or in my own mind, a seamless segue from what is the proper role of government. Now that we've said, okay, the local government can operate within these parameters legally, what should leadership be? Well, leadership, in my opinion, you can't lead. You can't lead if you don't know, and you can't know if you don't ask. And the people to ask are in our neighborhoods, which is why I've spent very little money on signs, and very little money at all. I'm just walking around neighborhoods, knocking on doors. Hopefully not too late, but knocking on doors, meeting people, and asking them, "Hey, what are your main concerns about St. George? What do you love? What should we emphasize? What are some things we should address?" And to me, getting on the ground, walking among the people who live here, who work here, are the productive citizens, because government's not the thing that produces well-being. It's the people, it's families, it's mothers and fathers and teenage workers at Chick-fil-A. Like, they make our life happy. And our city workers are awesome. At the same time, what makes a community is its people. Yeah. And that's why I'm spending my time there. And time is money. Yeah. Right. So that's my investment. And that's how I think leadership should be. You should listen to everyone who wants to contribute. There are not people who are more important than others when you're trying to synthesize the needs of more than 100,000 people. You're trying to synthesize into a vision that is fair and optimal to everyone. And that means creating rules that we don't know the outcome of yet. Rules that we can all agree to before. We shouldn't have somebody come in and be like, "Oh yeah, we like you and we want you to have what you want, so we're going to now make a rule to benefit you." Yeah. Everything needs to be up front. and it should be applied to equally to everyone.
I mean, I think the biggest challenge, and this kind of segues into a different conversation or a different question, but I think the biggest challenge is getting that engagement from that populace, right? And I think the framers of the Constitution had seen this over and over again, whether it was Greek democracy and what happened with France and these different areas where direct democracy didn't work. So you have this representative democracy because the mob tends to engage in emotional decision-making, not necessarily intellectual decision-making. And so synthesizing that, how do you, from your perspective, what role does the community input play in your decision-making process? And then how do you weigh it against your own judgment? Because, having a rule that we can all agree to, it's like speed limit doesn't, I guess we all kind of agree to the speed limit, but it's just whether or not we decide to do that, right? So it's how do we're always going to disagree at the fringes.
That's true.
And then when you have the as the bell curve goes, that middle of the road, who rarely even stand up and say, "Hey, I have an opinion about this."
That's right.
So
I think I understand this question.
Yeah.
And so going with, and by the way, the other answers which I didn't touch on that the other candidates talked about, they're absolutely right. Water, public safety, fire, police. I mean, most of our budget, a plurality of our budget goes to public safety. And so I don't want to
rightfully
belabor
so.
that. Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. Rightfully so. Essentially so. Public safety is paramount, and so is water. I mean, those are the two absolute needs of a local community, especially one that's large. But to answer your question, when you're using the analogy of the French Revolution and mob mentality, okay, to me, if I was going to make an analogy today, the mob today is social media. And you don't get a wise or even representative
segment.
Sample of what people need and want on social media. It's hateful. There's nobody face to face. I can tell you when I'm walking down the street in Little Valley and there's a couple walking down the street. I'm like, "Hey, I'm Nate. You mind if I introduce myself?" They tell me a lot of stuff, things that they might not otherwise, things they wouldn't dare say on social media because people will cancel them, excoriate them, mock them, pull them through the mud. Basically, like you said, be the post-internet age mob equivalent to, at earlier mobs, right? Yeah. And so I'm not spending a lot of time on social media either.
Yeah.
I'm literally spending most of my time talking to people.
Yeah. Like
I just bought some alkaline water from someone from El Salvador, and they gave me some really good ideas about business here in St. George. Anyway, but the question is, how do we govern from the middle to help the most people? And that's where I'm running, is in the middle.
Yeah.
And because I'm concerned that no 5 people, let's say it's like you and Sean Guzman and Greg Prince, like the smartest people in our community or something.
Not me.
Like,
don't put me in that group.
But no 5 people are smart enough to determine where every single building should go. We've tried that before.
Yeah.
In various expressions of Marxism. And by the way, Marx is a really good social scientist. I might not get votes for that, but he is. Okay, and
I took a Marxism class. I was political science. I talked.
Yeah, he is an actual genius, and he was a lawyer.
Yeah,
he switched over to sociology.
And he had some things that he definitely, I think, got wrong, and also because you only know what you know. But he also got to the heart of like human nature.
That's right.
And I think that's where he, because if you look at Lenin and Hitler and Stalin, they all don't. They're not following exactly what Marx.
No,
really is.
But
his body of work that he does. Right?
Absolutely, and as smart as Marx is, he's not qualified to do centrally planning.
Right.
Nobody is. Not Obama. Not Trump. Not Marx. Not George Washington.
Yeah.
Nobody's qualified to do that, because here's the thing. I mean, I brought this just because I was talking about inputs, earlier about and supply for housing and how we might be able to make homes within reach for people who live here and love here and work here. And that's, man, every pizza place I've gone to, I must eat a lot of pizza, but the guys in their 20s, they're like, we have 2 incomes. They got me and my girlfriend, or me and my wife, or my husband, no kids. We're working full time or 2.5 jobs, and we cannot purchase even a condo. That matters. Yeah. That doesn't make me a raging liberal. It makes me someone with a heart.
Yeah.
And see, when you're the federal government, that level, we should probably be more fiscally restrained. Otherwise, we're going to go off a cliff with debt, right? We're already paying $1 trillion a year from our taxes just to cover the cost of our debt. That is outrageous. But when you get down to the local level, we're like a family. And we have to treat each other well. You don't go into a family and be like, all right, the 6-year-old, you didn't produce enough today, so you don't get food. That's not right.
Yeah.
And I view a city like that. We all need smooth sidewalks. We all need safety. And if you look at one of my cards, my first issue is traffic safety. It's a boring issue, but the number of people I've talked to who are concerned about it is actually really high.
Yeah.
And
traffic tends to, in multiple surveys, especially if you weed out like the cyclical nature of issues, right? Like housing, 5 years ago, affordable housing was barely on the radar as something that was important to somebody. And now it's like at the very top, right? And so if you weed out some of those, things that ebb and flow, traffic is always up there.
That's right.
Traffic and safety is always up there. It's always up there.
And some people ask,
perennial.
Well, how are we going to maintain infrastructure and reasonable commutes, which we have good commutes in St. George. I mean, you compare it to LA.
Yeah, relatively, yeah.
If you compare it to Las Vegas, compare it to Salt Lake, even Provo, it's better. Like, it is awesome here. I'm not saying it can't be better, but it probably won't be better. And there's a reason for that. If we have 50,000 more people move here, which I'm taking no position on, but if we do, no matter how good our infrastructure is, our commute from where I live up on the Black Hill to Costco, it will be longer. Even, I mean, it's just a fact. And that's why when we're on city council, we need to be cognizant of just the basics of economics and its interaction with law, because some of our decisions we make are going to have long-term impacts on the economy and even on criminology itself. So, I mean, just when you're looking at something, it can't just be, oh, I like this, franchise, and not saying anybody does that, or, I prefer this color, or I like what they're doing. You have to also consider, what are the opportunity costs? What are the trade-offs? What incentives are we creating? And what are the negative and positive externalities that come with this investment? The thing we can invest in the very most is ideas, bringing people here to share ideas. And there's so many examples in history. I have to stop myself or I'll go on a tangent. Thank you.
That's okay. No, you're right. I think, and it's refocusing those things. You have revenue coming in and costs going out. How do we balance those things? And then where do we focus maybe excess dollars, right? Because you gotta balance out the budget. Right. So like, where do you focus some of those excess dollars? Where do you
yeah, that's right.
Where are the long-term investments that come into it?
When we're talking about negative externalities, incentives, trade-offs, and opportunity costs, we clearly need a road from the Santa Clara Ivans area down to southern St. George. That's the Western Corridor.
Western Corridor.
I support the Western Corridor. People in Sun River were asking me, they're like, yeah, but does it have to go right between Sun River? And my answer is, we should really be open to people who are most impacted. So I-15 will probably be widened. We're going to have an underpass at 900 South and 400 East, maybe another one as well. But when they widen I-15 here through St. George eventually, there's going to be certain homes where the decibel level is going to go above 5 decibel increase on a daily basis on average. That triggers something that UDOT allows a hyper-local election to occur. And I love this. This is the kind of democracy we need at the local level. People are impacted. We're not going to ask the people in Kayenta whether there should be noise barriers on I-15.
Yeah.
We're going to ask the people who live next to it. The only way that this vote counts is if 75% of the residents near the noise barriers participate. And the only way it passes, if they have that quorum of 75%, is if 75% of that quorum, 75% of that 75%, agree to it. And so what is 75 times 75? That would be, I don't know, like in the 50%, like at least 50% of the people who live there, just over that, would have to participate in order for it to be legitimate. And I really do think that we need to consider who is impacted by what we do and listen to their voice a little bit more. That's why I don't like the mob mentality on social media, and I don't like necessarily just pure democracy, because there's certain rights that we shouldn't run over. For example, let's say that you're in a dilapidated house in downtown St. George and you've lived there for 30 years. And by dilapidated, I mean quaint, not a public health issue. And maybe you haven't painted it. And then somebody comes in and is like, you know what, we're going to build a skyscraper downtown St. George, maybe not, sorry, like an 8-story building.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying you can't do that on your own property, but what if there's just that one little house that's a holdout? Kelo versus New London, Connecticut, an early 2000s Supreme Court case, which was absolutely antithetical to the Fifth Amendment due process clause and the public takings clause. They said, for economic development, you could take private property, knock down their house, give them quote unquote market value, and then build something on top of it. That is so wrong from the left to the right. If you have any heart for people who bought their house, there's no way you can support that.
Yeah.
Even if it's for economic well-being.
Is that the court case that they use for eminent domain? Is that what they use?
It's the one they used in the early 2000s. It's in New London, Connecticut versus Kelo, to use eminent domain for economic development rather than for public use. I'm not saying that the Fifth Amendment doesn't allow all sorts of public use. It does. We could take a private home and build a school upon that lot, or a sewage treatment plant, or a water treatment plant, or even expand the freeway onto people's property. And, throughout St. George, I think there's about a 7.5-foot easement around everybody's property anyway, especially downtown, but I think it extends even farther out throughout the city. So those are
the point being
those are just realities. But when you're doing it for, we like this person more, or they're going to be more economically advantageous in revenue, that's just wrong. We don't do that in St. George, by the way. I'm just giving an example where your frame of mind is and how you're approaching this kind of a management. That there are certain rights that I don't care how big the majority is, that you can't take it from them.
So this
include life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness to some extent.
So yeah, I think you kind of covered this too. Is when how do you choose, or if you had to choose between preserving cultural heritage and fostering innovation in the city, which one do you prioritize?
That's a really good question. So growing up in Austin, Texas, they've been able to preserve both. So Austin, Texas has now become a magnet because of its unique culture for all sorts of ideas and investment, from technology to even alternative forms of higher education. I think the Dixie spirit, which in the context of the historical West is actually very pluralistic, tolerant, hardworking, and open-minded. I think the Dixie spirit can attract the innovation that we want. And so we don't have to choose between it. We can have the St. George Musical Theater preserving this type of local and historic culture for the new people who come here. When it comes to the arts, when it comes to theater, when it comes to music, in my opinion, that's the fastest and most concentrated form of conveying culture from those who live here to those who are new. And there's no reason to get rid of that. Austin hasn't, and we don't need to either. Yeah.
I think you're right on that. And so then what do you think the role of economic growth is in a community's well-being? And then how does it compare to those other those other priorities like quality of life and cultural preservation?
Absolutely. I mean, if it comes down to, can people live a good life and have their basic necessities met, versus if you're making me choose, and I don't think we need to choose, that's preeminent. I mean, we have to have good healthcare, and we have awesome healthcare. But not only that, for people who don't have insurance, and maybe people where Medicaid's not working, so we have doctors-free clinic. That's done by the people here. Every time there's a trade, a voluntary trade, where people are mainly aware, they're consenting voluntarily, and maybe they're not fully aware, but enough to make it fair. Every time we trade, that increases value in our society and happiness. Because if I trade you, then, this notebook for your watch, you're not going to be happy, I'll be happy. But we could figure something out, and that's why we have
Unless money. I really need it.
Right, exactly. That's actually a good point.
Yeah.
That's true.
I got to make a paper airplane or something.
Right. And of course, the advantage of currency is that it's a medium of exchange that helps us avoid the coincidence of wants and, store value. Anyway, I honestly think that our cultural heritage will be preserved more so by economic development than trying to stop it.
Yeah.
This place is awesome. Obviously, there's some controversy over what we're going to call Greater Zion or Dixie. But you know what? They're both good. Yeah. And we should embrace both of them. Yeah. I was just at a private airport in Dallas, Texas recently, and I was telling the people, I'm like, I'm from, Utah. I'm like, that's pretty boring, whatever. And I said, but I live kind of near, within an hour of Zion National Park. And like, what? And, they're with their private airplane. They think this is one of the coolest places in the world.
Yeah.
And it is. Economic development cannot injure the beauty that we all love. And we do agree on what is beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think we need to leave that.
Yeah.
alone.
And so that was kind of a follow-up question too, is it acceptable for the local government to prioritize that economic growth over the environment?
No.
And environmental
No, it's not.
protection?
We cannot prioritize economic growth over the preservation of certain types of our environment. I don't care if it's $1 billion house. We're not going to build, if I'm on the city council, houses in Pioneer Park and block the Sugarloaf, or what most people call Dixie Rock, or put something in front of the D. Or
I think more probably would be a bigger, more legitimate one. If you think of the northern corridor, economic growth off exit 13, this is an incentive. SITLA has, a vested interest in the exit being developed, and it's essentially, and this is from SITLA themselves, is contingent upon the northern corridor going around, right? So economic growth, preserving the environment. Does that road, it weighs into this, is that road, damaging the environment? Yes and no. And then the second would be, well, then SITLA owning the property Bear Claw Poppy, right, behind Bloomington. It's like, well, if we don't get that, then we're going to develop this. And then it goes back into this, prioritizing that. And these are legitimate conversations that it's one or the other. And right now the arrow is being pointed at Bear Claw Poppy. And when I think of what that would do to that part of the area, oh man, it breaks my heart. Like it legitimately breaks my heart.
For people listening, SITLA is the school and institutional trust lands.
And I think they're trust land, Utah Trust Lands. I think they rebranded.
Oh, is that what they're called now? Okay.
Yeah. But the original,
the old acronym, SITLA. Right. And they have a duty to dispose of their lands with the goal of advancing education and raising as much money as possible. So they have a fiduciary duty, in a sense, to the youth and families of our state to provide education. They can't just, secretly give something.
And you might not know this as well, but it's actually, it's actually required based off of the Constitution. It was established as far as acquirement of statehood for Utah to get its state was for SITLA to do this purpose. So it extends beyond just the governor at the head. It goes like, this is something that's way beyond, just what we're doing here in the local.
That's right. And so it's something good to remember that even if we have a 5-0 vote on the city council, we're completely bound by various levels of government above us and constitutions and statute and things like that. So this position is actually not the most important.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly, Zach Renstrom at the Water District, who's both a lawyer and an engineer, really, really smart guy.
And funny. Funny. Can you believe that? Like, can you get the trifecta? This is crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's amazing. That is an extremely important job. I mean, drinking water in the desert, of all the elements of nature, that is our most important, right? But you asked the question, Bear Claw Poppy or the Red Cliffs Desert Reserve, which do we infringe on? And it's apparently going to be one or the other. Two things have to happen here. One, we need to listen to the people who live in both and have as many public meetings as the people desire. I mean, obviously there could be it to excess if people are causing, public disturbances, but we're way, way on the minimal side of listening to the public. We need to have more town halls and hear why this matters. Because, if you're over at Bear Claw Poppy, there's chuckwallas everywhere and awesome snakes. And it's a beautiful place to mountain bike and to run.
It's incredible.
It's just amazing, right? And if you go over to the Red Cliffs Reserve, it's equally incredible.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most gorgeous places there is. I mean, it would be ideal if we didn't touch either one. And it would also be ideal if we could go from one side of the town to the other without having to build infrastructure. But that's where economics comes in, and trade-offs and opportunity costs. And sadly, there will be negative externalities. There'll be positive ones. And sadly, there will be environmental degradation wherever we do this.
Yeah.
And I don't have the answer for that, but I am willing to listen to all people and make a decision that I hope is wise as best I possibly can.
Yeah.
In just, not that it's the city council's decision, but it needs to be a public discussion.
It needs to be a public discussion for sure. Aside from that, because I I want to make these as digestible, and I think we've covered a lot. I think people kind of understand, where your thought processes are. What you put on there, public safety, traffic. Aside from that, is there anything else where you're seeing, hey, there's a need for change at the city council level in any of these other respects?
Yeah, I don't have any critique of any of my fellow candidates. I think they're very smart and good people. And if you vote for them, I think that's a good vote. What I would say is there are a couple issues that we can bring to the forefront and have a public discussion and learn from each other. And, being aware of something gives us more power over that thing and more agency to act in that area. And so one of them, in my opinion, is the public arts. So there are a small group of people who fund those, music, art, and theater in Tuacahn and St. George Musical Theater. We should have more of a public discussion on how we can use theater and public support for the arts to preserve our cultural heritage. And it's actually a really small investment to preserve cultural heritage through art compared to maybe maintaining huge lots downtown. Not that I'm against that, but it's a more effective investment through art. Secondly, affordable housing or attainable housing. This is how I would describe it. The people I've been talking to, like the guys and gals in their 20s, who are like, we literally have enough money to pay $2,500 a month in rent, which translates actually to probably $1,900 a month in a mortgage, for the same place, but we can't get it. I don't know what we do, but it's something we have to talk about. And there's a lot of people, like you said, 5 years ago didn't care, but now all of a sudden they do. And it's not just because we have a supply issue and inflation issues and our equilibrium of supply and demand, quantity supplied and quantity demanded is now much higher, a higher price point than it was. It's also because a lot of these kids who were teenagers before go into our local high schools, they're now 25, they're working hard, they're getting married, and they cannot stay here, even if they're smart, even if they're doing good things. And that, to me, is a real concern that we should be compassionate about and think of something to do. Yeah. And there are things to do. I mean, the inputs for supply, building, or, you got land, not much you can do about that. I mean, Mike Lee is talking about some things. Hopefully it's a more restrained version of what he's talking about.
Yeah, but that was a debacle. I don't know what was happening with that thing.
Right. But there are some BLM lands that could be ideal for affordable housing. Yeah. Not all of them, certainly never a national forest, which he's excluded from that, by the way. So we got land input. We have material inputs, which are subject to supply chain pandemics. And we also have labor. We don't want to scrimp on labor because that's how probably 18% of our local residents survive is in something related to construction.
Yeah, I think it goes up to 30 if you collect 30%? If you collect like there's specific construction, and then there's like the specialties like an electrician and a plumber and an HVAC, which gets separated into a different category. So construction itself, which I think would be probably framers, concrete, and like road base, like some of the physical bones of it. But then there's like the finished work kind of comes out. So it ends up being about 30%. Okay, which is a big number.
A significant portion of our people who get their bread, so to speak, and their cool air and their cars and their education and their family togetherness and healthcare through construction. And so we cannot scrimp on labor costs. If anything, we should have higher wages here. I'll say that even if I lose the election, we must have higher wages. Yeah. We're not Republicans from the 1950s thinking we can control inflation through wages. I'm sorry. I think that's cruel. But finally, there is something that city council can do. We should say local government. And that's regulation. And in regulation, I'm including taxes, impact fees, planning commission, the equivalent of an architectural committee, which our city council should not be. We shouldn't become a HOA architectural committee. We should set forth some basic rules for zoning and let everybody govern themselves within those zones. I talked to Steve Kemp briefly about some ideas on...
You talked to Steve Kemp briefly?
Briefly, yeah.
You did? I don't think I've ever had a brief conversation with Steve.
I must have been really boring, so maybe kind of short. But in any case, he mentioned, and I'm not saying this is his public position, but it was a good idea, and I wanted to credit him with Steve Kemp with this, is that within zones, so that, let's say like commercial 1 and 2, what if we can move up just a step within commercial or down a step and do something without having to go through a very long process? And he gave me an example. So Greg Kemp, who, I hope this isn't too private, Greg Kemp and my dad, we used to work together in accounting. My dad was his, low-level accountant. And then later on in life, after my dad started a technology company, they came together to make an agreement to build a really nice building, commercial building that would be basically a data center and run quality assurance software. Anyway, it was really beneficial to both parties, both Greg and Steve. Steve Kemp reminded me that agreement between Greg Kemp and Steve Kaplan was hammered out in about an hour and a half with their attorneys. And it's my understanding something that simple at the city would take at least half a year. That's problematic.
Yeah.
And time really is money.
Yeah.
And that's one way we can get out of the way. We can affect supply in a small way by making regulations more certain and more navigable.
Yeah.
Not getting rid of them.
I agree with that. All right. Last question. What is your perspective on term limits? And I think I should move this one to the front because I don't know if everybody gets all the way to the end, but what is your perspective on term limits, and whether it's local level, state level, federal level? What are your thoughts on that?
That is such a good question. And from a legal standpoint, each of those is a different question, the federal, the state, and the local. We already have court cases that restrict state's ability to put term limits on federal officials. But let me just get to the heart of the matter. I'm running for city council. And this is my personal belief. No one should serve more than 2 terms, ever. Not a city councilman and not a mayor. 2 terms. It's good enough for George Washington and, many other great leaders after him. It's certainly good enough for a city councilman in St. George, Utah.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's simple. There you go.
That's my answer.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. I don't know if 2's it. I don't know if 3's it.
Right. But it has to be something.
But even the court
reasonable.
cases, I would love to dive into like the court cases part, because I haven't talked to an attorney about this. But like, what is what are the barriers there, and then how is it rooted in each individual state's constitution and the federal constitution? I just don't know all that. But what my thought is I think we have to. There are certain things that have larger impacts, bigger dominoes that knock over more things. And I really believe that term limits could be a political shift that happens where the requirement of service is one that is, if I get into politics, it's something I have to commit to forever, versus like, oh no, this shifts out on a kind of regular basis. And this is something that I could get into and then I can get out. And I think it limits the power of lobbies. I think it limits the power of interest groups that are, long standing, because an incumbent wins 80% of the time. And so if an incumbent always wins, then as a betting individual, and I'm trying to influence an individual, you're going to put the money on those people. And so I think just in looking at that perspective,
money in politics is a huge issue.
And you can't respect, the constitutionality of the freedom of speech and saying my dollar is going towards this person because I believe them. That one, I don't think is ever going to get to overturned, because I think it's pretty sound. It's like, you're telling me I can't spend this dollar to support this person, whether it's a
right. The McCain campaign finance bill has been curtailed greatly by the U.S. Supreme Court.
And so what's another way to do it?
But at the local level and at the state level, we actually can implement term limits legally.
Yeah.
And
well, there we go.
I keep it to 2.
Let's do it.
My thought.
Let's do it. After city council, after two runs, then let's just make a push to this, and we'll just shift the whole. It sounds good. Yeah. All right. Where can people find information about you?
Well,
if you're not on social media, which is fine.
Well, I do have a Facebook account, and I have a website that I'm actually finishing building this afternoon and tomorrow. But Nathan Kaplan, and let me give you my cell phone number, because I'd
write it down, everybody.
I'd actually prefer to have one-on-one conversations or group conversations, small Zoom, like what you're providing here. It's elevating the democratic and intellectual character of our community by letting somebody answer questions honestly for 30 or 35 minutes. So this is my cell phone number. It's 435-668-4677, 435-668-4677. And you can call me, And I don't sleep that much, so feel free to call anytime.
You need a little bit of sleep. And then for everybody else, all the other candidates, go to votestg.com. Share that link with everybody. All the candidates are listed there. They filled out survey questions. The interviews are there. You can go to One Stop for Ivan, Santa Clara, St. George, Washington, and Hurricane City. Find out who's the best candidate to make the right choice for your city. And hope you enjoyed this one, guys. We'll see you out there. Thanks for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Make sure you're following us on all the social media websites. We love your support. We love the dialogue. We want to continue that going.
Find us at realestate435.com. We'd love to help you find a house here in town or help you get wherever you're going.